Thank you for joining us for AI Unleashed, Navigating Boundless Intelligence and Existential Risks, Choosing Our Future. Our speaker will be Martin Hilbert, who already has some fans in the audience, evidently. More so after you hear this extensive bio. Martin Hilbert is professor at UC Davis, where he studies the role of algorithms in complex social systems. He holds doctorates in economics, 2006, and communication, 2012, is associated with communication and computer science at UC Davis, and chairs the campus-wide emphasis in computational social science. His work is recognized in academia for the first study quantifying the world's technological information capacity, in public policy for designing the original digital action plan with Latin American governments at the United Nations, and in the popular media for alerting about Cambridge Analytica's intervention a year before the scandal. Before he joined academia, he served as Economic Affairs Officer of the United Nations Secretariat for 15 years. He retired from his tenure at the UN at the age of 37 to join the University of California, which he sees as his playground. His classes are taken by students from all UC campuses through UC Online, and he developed the first UC Online course that is collectively taught by faculty from all 10 UC campuses. Professor Hilbert has provided technical assistance in the field of digital development to more than 20 countries and dozens of publicly traded companies as digital strategist. His work has been published in the most recognized academic journals, such as Science, Psychological Bulletin, Trends in Ecology and Evolution, and World Development. And he regularly appears in popular magazines, such as The Economist, on NPR and the BBC, and in the Washington Post. Maybe I'll restart my subscription. International perspectives are no mere theory to Professor Hilbert, as he speaks 5 languages, has called 4 continents home, and has traveled to more than 70 countries. I'm so glad he's traveled across campus to join us here today as our second keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Martin Hilbert.
Thank you very much, Andy. Somebody once told me that the importance of a person and the length of the introduction that they give him is inversely correlated. Right, so they say, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Right? So thank you, Andy, for putting me into my place. AI Unleashed, the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the hopeful, let's see. So while we were all busy with the pandemic, AI took a jump which is known as the parameter gap. And after we emerged from the pandemic, they turned out surprisingly useful, right? By jumping here, that's a logarithmic graph, an order of magnitude in the number of parameters, which is probably best exemplified by the outstanding success of ChatGPT, which is the fastest diffusing innovation in the history of humankind. Nothing ever diffused as fast and was adapted as enthusiastically by humankind as that thing. So that's a big one. I'm a big fan of it. I know there are many fans here as well, looking at the presentations. I talk with large language models probably some 2 or 3 hours a day. And I automatically, when they, for example, invite me to give these talks, and they ask me, hey, send me a bio, I do the obvious thing, right? I just turn around and ask ChatGPT about it. So who is Martin Hilbert? And what it told me, Martin Hilbert is a researcher, and he's a professor at the University of Southern California. Now that's literally confusing the Trojans with the Bruins, right? You know, like somebody calls Sam Altman and tell him like that's not okay, right? So okay, so it also said that I served as the head of the Information Society program at the United Nations Secretariat in New York, which is great because I didn't. I served in Latin America, so it just gave me a promotion to be the global head, right? So that's why I like talking with it so much, right? I think that's what they call user friendliness. Like they make you feel better about what you. Okay, so let's regenerate that thing. And let's see, okay, so Martin Hilbert is a professor at the University of California, yes. And he did a lot of important things which earned him the nickname the Digital Aristotle. damn. Now there I got like a little flabbergasted, right? Making me blush and like a smooth talking charmer, right? I think that's really user friendliness, right? And I got so excited at Digital Aristotle. Did you guys read that? And so I got so excited about it that I did the obvious thing. I went to the other LLM that creates images and asked it what it looks like, and I thought maybe a picture of mine comes up, right? No, it doesn't. If you're interested, that's what the Digital Aristotle looks like. As we all know, it has 3 feet, right? 1, 2, 3. And so I'm like, wait a second. So where did you actually get that from, that Martin Hilbert is named the Digital Aristotle? He said, well, from all the important interviews he gave and newspaper articles. And I'm like, what? If I would have, like, no, I would have known about that, right? So, and then, you know, you get a little bit disappointed, and then I went to the ultimate resource. Really, I tell you the truth, cards on the table, I went to the ultimate thing. Do you guys remember Google? You know, that filter bubble misinformation machine that polarizes our society and makes our children addicted. Now we go to Google as the source for truth. That's how far we have gotten. And I put it in, and 1 trillion indexed web pages and not one single result. All right. So I just asked it, I'm like, hey, look, are you telling me the truth? And it told me, look, no, my task is not to tell you the truth. My task is also not to tell you lies. My task is to sound like a human. And that actually goes very deep, because the father of computer science, Alan Turing, in the 1950s, when he asked himself, how would we know that a machine is intelligent? He had this test, and he said, well, if you chat with something behind the curtain and you cannot be absolutely sure if it's a human or a machine, then you have to assume that thing is intelligence. And I always thought like we would pass the Turing test, and hopefully during my lifetime, right? Because you know, we are all nerds, so we thought like secretly we thought like maybe that we would pass it in 2023. I was surprised. I was really surprised. I was shocked. I did not see that coming. But yes, and we passed much more than that. So for example, we accept here at the University of California really the most intelligent humans, and for them to accept them, we make them take some tests like the SAT. So the humans in SAT, they usually get some 60, 65% in the scores, and ChatGPT gets 80%. Now, the best of these intelligent humans we accept as doctorates, and in order to apply for a PhD, you have to take the GRE. And we can see here that in verbal, it beats us, right? And in writing, it beats, but you know, in quantitative, we are still ahead, right? In quantitative, like in advanced math, we are still ahead. Same as, for example, the bar exam. So that's the doctorate, when you finish your doctorate. So when you finish your doctorate, it's like 4 years after college, we are still ahead of ChatGPT until last year, when ChatGPT also won us in that one, right? And we also with UC Health, right? It also passed the US medical license exam. So it got qualified to work as a lawyer, basically, and as a doctor. So not only qualifying. And you know, the majority of humankind, doesn't study at the University of California, does not get accepted for a doctorate, and does not graduate as a doctorate. And it blows us out of the water in that as well, which makes us think a lot about like what intelligence really is. So let's see what it can do, the good. It affects all different aspects of our society, right? Let's start with technology, of course, because we're here at UC Tech, and see what it can do there. So GitHub did that's kind of like, it's kind of like a Wikipedia for the ones of us that write code. GitHub did a study, and because it has this Copilot, the Copilot is basically a ChatGPT version that helps you writing code. And they gave some of the coders ChatGPT, like this Copilot, as an assistant and other not. And they did a randomized controlled trial to see how it helps them. And the senior software engineer says, with Copilot, I have to think less. And when I have to think, it's the fun stuff. It sets off a little spark that makes coding more fun and more efficient. Now, you never get those two together, right? So either it's fun or it's efficient. You never get those two. So what did they find in this randomized controlled trial? Well, it increases productivity by 55%. Now that is a lot. Like 55%, that's amazingly a lot. So it basically finishes your study. When your boss gave you an assignment for the entire week, you finish on Wednesday morning. Like that's how fast that basically is. Now don't tell your boss about it, right? You just finish it Wednesday morning. Or, but also in satisfaction, job satisfaction, we can see here it increases the satisfaction with the job by more than 70%. So this is basically amazing that it both increases productivity, and we find this 50-55% with most actually. With most jobs, we find that it increases productivity by that much. And at the same time, it increases satisfaction. Education, let's go about that. So, of course, first of all, we first thought it will destroy education and started to ban it and so forth. But then we started to realize that, just a second, there's something here. We started to realize that it can also help us. So what Khan did here, sorry, missed my. What Khan did here from the Khan Academy, but for a long time, sorry, I think I'm on the wrong version of the presentation. So what Khan did here from the Khan Academy is for a long time, we knew that students with an individual tutor, if we would have an individual tutor for a student, they could increase their performance in education by their letter grade by 2 standard deviations. That's quite a bit. That's going from a C- to an A or to an A- in my classes, for example. Now, my classes are on UC Extension online on Coursera, and I have 70,000 students there. Where do I get 70,000 tutors from? Right? Now, the ones who can afford a tutor, yes, we know they can. So what Khan did, Sal Khan from the Khan Academy, which is a huge online tutor organization, and he traditionally taught these tutor classes on YouTube, he took a version of ChatGPT, an early version, and fine-tuned it in order to be an online tutor. It took him half a year, and interesting, I mean, here among us, he didn't use RAG, he used a lot of fine-tuning and RLHF and prompt engineering for half a year, and he said, okay, the first thing that this Khan Migo, it's called, this online tutor should do is should not reveal the answer, because that's the first thing students will do. They ask, okay, give me the answer. So it doesn't give him the answer, it is fine-tuned to guess what the heck's going on in the head of the student. Like what is, because that's what a good tutor actually does. And he did that for half a year, and it actually turns out amazing. So if you want to learn how to write code, I'm really jealous. Remember how we learned how to code? At 2 o'clock in the morning with like the 6th coffee, trying to go on some obscure online forum, banging our head against the wall because this parentheses and the brackets. No, like now here they have a private tutor on their site that shows them how to code these things. And it's not only the quantitative coding stuff, it's also the qualitative thing. So instead of a teacher now saying, read this diary about George Washington, he just says, talk 2 hours with George Washington. And they can talk with George Washington, and they find very interesting things. So the most popular question is, they ask George Washington, were you ever afraid? And they can tell him all about it because it read all the diaries about George Washington. Or also in literature, right? You can literally ask Juliet what the heck she thinks it's so amazing about this Romeo dude, and then have a dialogue with them to really understand what this is all about. Now, not only in like elementary education or high school education, also in advanced science education here, or policy. When I worked in the UN, I often had to explain policies. And the most general and communicative model is actually a visual model, an agent-based computer simulation. So when we do social science nowadays on advanced, complex problems, we do these simulations. It's a little bit like playing SimCity. You remember that? Who played SimCity? Yeah, right. Now that's how it looks nowadays. For us, it was in 2D, right? It's really frustrating as well. But that's basically what we do. And then when we take these computer simulations and connect them, we calibrate them with real-world data in real time. We call it a digital twin. And that's a digital twin of the city of Chicago. That's one from the US military in Afghanistan. And generative AI allows us to generate these kind of models, because before that you really have to code that up. It would cost $1 billion to create a video game. But with generative AI, even us scientists now can generate these kind of environments, these kind of models. And this morning we had a presentation of UC Davis using 3D. That's what we used here, the Keck Cave in UC Davis. And that's how they knew where to land the Mars rover on Mars. Because the scientists were walking around on Mars for a long time already. They were in a digital twin of Mars. And my friends in the industry, When they talk about these digital twins, they call that Industry 4.0. So generative AI, that's how they design our machines and cars. So generative AI allows us to generate these models also for advanced science. So in education, it helps, and then it allows us to explain it to policymakers in a much more visual sense. So in education, it helps a lot. Of course, it also helps a lot in business. And here, the first unexpected early winners are people like me, wonky consultants, I tell you. I've been on a lot of airplanes in the last few months because there's really a big demand for people talking about that. So let's go to the highest paid of the wonky consultants. So these guys like the Boston Consulting Group, they charge you $1 million just to start to look at your organization. That could be a university, that could be a company, a government, a municipality. And they did a survey with 750 of them. And again, half of them they gave ChatGPT 3.5, the 3 version, it was back then. And half of them they just do a consultancy gig just like you do. And I think it was a company selling shoes or something. And then they would take the senior consultants and evaluate the different strategies that they came up with. Just as they would when they would decide who of these young consultants should become a partner or who should get promoted, right? So the senior consultants give it an assessment. And it was 750. And the average on a scale from 1 to 8, the average is 4. So if you just, on average, people would just write a strategy, they would get a grade of 4. The ones that had ChatGPT on their side got a 6. And the ones that they gave a crash course in prompt engineering, they got even a little bit higher. So that's pretty nuts. We are charging $1 million for a product, and I give you a free web version on top, and I can improve the quality of your output by 50% in the highest paid jobs on planet Earth. So it's not only 50% increase in quantity, in efficiency, like we saw for the coders, also in the quality of the output. Now, you can imagine the effects that will have on the economy if we talk about not only productivity increases, but also quality increases that we see here. Now, there are 3 interesting lessons learned from that. Number 1, the people who are not the top consultants improved more with ChatGPT than the ones that were already on top. Now that might just be a measurement thing, right? So because if you're on the top, you cannot increase much more because you're already close to the 8. You cannot increase much more. So if you're down, you can increase more. On the other hand, you could look at it like, use ChatGPT for the task you're not good at. So for example, like, I'm not a great cook, I might use it for cooking, right? So use it for that and you can increase a lot. So the good ones still improve. They improve by 17%, but the other ones can increase their capabilities by 43%. The second lesson was interesting in this study is that the answers on average got more homogeneous, so less diverse. And that's something very important we have to talk about. Now again here you might say, well, there's only one right answer. So if you're all on the top now, of course we're all going to be homogeneous. We're all going to have the right answer. But there's also something like groupthink that might catch us in a really suboptimal local optima, and then we're all going to crash. So that's something very interesting we have to talk about. And the third thing that they found in this study is that there are 2 different ways of collaborating. So the ones are more centaurs. They are either using the AI or they work themselves, or use the AI or they work themselves. And then they're more like the cyborgs who kind of like in the flow with AI. They're kind of like mixing it. And I don't know which style you are. Anybody knows? Anybody here is a centaur? Oh, yeah. Anybody here who is a cyborg? Yeah. So there are different styles. Now that was like last year. This year it goes further on, because now it's not only us working with an AI, it's us working with teams of AIs. And we talked a lot about that in this conference, how we create these different agents that it's called. And that framework goes basically like this. And I know you're all tech nerds, so you would love to bite your teeth into this kind of graph, right? Okay, there's the lower layers. Unfortunately, we don't have time. But basically what this says is we have the foundational models here on the bottom. So that's the ChatGPT, the Claude, the Gemini, the Mistral. So these are the foundational models. And then what we do is we carve out an agent out of that. And that's actually what worked. So look, for the last 20 years, we always thought, if we want to build an AI of George Washington, we code it bottom up. But that's not what worked. What worked is we create basically an AGI. If you would have told me 10 years ago that that's not an AGI, I would have told you what is it, right? So we basically create a general intelligence, a foundational model, and then we take everything away that's not George Washington. And then we are left with George Washington. And it still has basic reasoning skills. It's more like an artist that sees a tree and it says like, oh, I just took away everything that's not useful. And at the end, what is there is this wooden figure. So it's more, that's actually what worked. It never worked that we coded it bottom up. So we basically do it the other way around. And that's how we create these agents. And then, of course, what we talked a lot about in this conference, and I saw amazing presentations, is that we have to have this workflow inside the LLM, basically. So inside, for example, the AI. Some people call it pipeline, some people call it diagram. And at the end, once we have that, we have our RAG here, and we have our fine-tuning here, and we have our RLHF here, and whatever you want, and our search, and then we put it into a vector space, and all these different parts of the workflow. And at the end, we have our agent, which I just call Rocky Sod GPT, just occurred to me. Because these two presentations I was very impressed by. And that's the agent that we actually then talk with, and that's useful. So now we have one agent. But the really complex problems in our world are not tackled by one agent, they're tackled by teams. So if I, for example, something complex like something that nobody really can predict, the price of the stock market, like per definition, none of us can predict it. And if we would, we wouldn't be here, right? So nobody ever could. And that's a really complex problem. So at least for that doesn't have a clear solution, you need a team. So how do people usually do that? Again, I'm sorry, I know. We don't have time to bite our teeth into these graphs, but what does that basically mean? If I want to predict stock market prices, so for a company like Amazon, this is what this paper is about, they say, well, first of all, you need somebody who's on top of the news. So you need a newscaster. And then you need somebody who does some fundamentals research, like what's going on with Amazon, what's the business model. Then you need somebody who understands about macroeconomics and see what the tendencies are right now. And then you need somebody who's on top of stock prices. And then you have this entire team, you get together to a signal generator, and that thing, only with these 4 different AI agents, was able to outperform the S&P 100 by 43%. 80% of investment companies underperform the S&P 500. That thing outperformed the S&P 100 by 43%. And what it was, it's 4 different expert systems, different LLMs basically, that basically work together on different time frames. So notice, this here is monthly update, quarterly update, bi-weekly update, live update. Now, the idea here is, okay, I did this exercise, but should I really trust this newscaster? Maybe she is too liberal. Maybe I also need a conservative newscaster here, right? And this fundamentals researcher, maybe I don't need somebody who's more optimistic. I also need somebody who's a little pessimistic. And I need a neoclassical, and I need an evolutionary economist. And for the stock prices, I want somebody who does Elliott wave, but I also want somebody who does traditional prediction models. And then I put these in. And that was my Tuesday afternoon. And the Wednesday afternoon, as Professor Hinton always say, I just do right mouse button, copy, paste, and I create a bunch more of them. So for example, I create 4 different newscasters, and then I create 4 different fundamental summary managers, and then I create 4 different economic professors, and then I create 4 different stock price analysts. And if you don't understand anything, and that's on purpose because we do not understand that anymore. We don't. And so, okay, if you get these 16 people into a room, what do you think? 4-hour meeting? Give everybody 15 minutes? They do that in 4 seconds. They don't even need to talk. They just like rattle it out and do it. So these pipelines and these workflows that we build, we do that. So you basically become a team manager. You become a team manager of different agents. One is completely conservative, one is very creative, one is critical, one is neoclassic, one is, and then your job is to be a human research, no, not a human research manager, an AI research manager, basically. And there is no way, so I use it a lot for my students to get to the truth. You know, this problem say, oh, LLMs you don't know if they hallucinate. You kick one answer from one LLM into the other, and you do that with a round between Gemini and JetGPT and Mistral and so forth, you get very quickly to the truth. You get very quickly to the truth, right? So it's like, there's no way, shape, or form we humans can keep up with that kind of dynamic and how quickly they go. Because as Professor Hinton says, right mouse button, copy paste, and you create a new intelligence. And once one of them understands something, all of them do. Right mouse button, copy paste. Right? These are just weights in a neural network. I can just multiply them as far as I can. So that's what they did here in this health example. Google did that with MedPalm. And they knew already that they can only train a doctor. So this is a primary care physician that receives basically people. And then they knew they can only train it so much as the training data goes. But they wanted to increase it a little bit more. So what they did is they created one AI that's a patient simulator and one that's a critic, and let it run a few thousand years overnight, interaction between the two. And it turned out they then outperformed even not only the clinician, but also the clinician with the AI. The AI became better than the human and the machine combined. And the interesting thing, not only in diagnostic accuracy, but also down here, check that out, in empathy. It became more empathetic. The patient's confidence in care increased beyond that they would trust or feel empathy with a doctor. Now that's not very difficult, honestly, just because the bar is so low, right? I don't know when you've been last to a doctor. But if they give you 7.5 minutes of their time, it's a lot, right? And here you can just talk 3 hours with that thing. It's like, hey, do you have any more questions? Like, sure, I have more time. But and that's just by playing between two AI agents. And they do that a lot then as well to assist the humans. As I said, the bar is very low for humans often, and these AIs can help us also to become better humans, become more empathetic humans, and so forth. So for example, what they did here in these self-help forums, mental health forums, after the pandemic, we were really lacking, we were missing therapists. So people by the thousands went to these mental health forums, but that's kind of like, like a one-eyed helping a blind how to walk, right? So it's like it didn't really go so well. So what these researchers did is they say, okay, we program an AI to help people to help each other better. And that's kind of like a spell check, but a spell check for emotional intelligence. So you will go to this forum, but before you post, the AI would give you recommendations of how to post it. For example, you would say, like, you see somebody posting something, and then you would want to chime in, but the AI reads your post before and says, hey, great post, but don't you want to start with validating the other's point of view? Maybe you should validate before you give a solution. And we all know that, we all should do that, we just don't have time. We just give the solution, right? Because we are so smart, we want to help. But yes, it's important to validate before to build that level of trust. So these are the kind of things what the AI does. And you can see that the humans with a robot are much more empathetic than the humans only. And this outperforms human not in rational, intelligence, quantitative, no, in one of the most human things, in empathy. And the more people use it, the more empathetic they are. So it outperforms human in some of the most human things. And the same they use in politics, for example. Like if you want to see one of the most toxic places on the internet, of course, go to a gun regulation forum. And what they did here as well, they did this kind of like LLM spell check, and they fine-tuned the LLM to say, look, we don't want to change people's opinion. The sports fanatics, the hunters, will still be in favor of guns, and the mothers who lost a child in a school shooting will still be against guns. We do not want to change their opinion. We just want to improve the quality of the dialogue. And that's what they did. The LLM really helped them to improve the conversation quality and the democratic reciprocity index. And most recently, last week, a study came out that really surprised me, and that has to do with conspiracy theories. So they took 2,200 conspiracy believers that had diverse conspiracy theories. So they believed there was something funky with JFK and aliens and the moon landing and presidential election fraud. And then they had 3 rounds of exchanges with ChatGPT-4, like really just 3 basic back and forth. And they asked them, how much do you believe in this theory? And they said, yeah, no, 80%. 80% with JFK, he was never shot. That was kind of like, or something like that. Or the moon landing was staged. I believe in that 80%. After 3 exchanges with ChatGPT, 3 back and forth, they reduced the belief in conspiracy theory by 20%. And that is so shocking because from psychology, we know that this is a belief. It's not an opinion. A belief is very low in Maslow's hierarchy. Like a belief you really need in order to make your Weltanschauung complete, right? You cannot let go of it. You have a hole there and you need it in order to hold reality together. You cannot even change the beliefs of your best friend or your spouse. I don't know if you ever tried, but you won't be able to. Now this thing changed 20% of the belief in 3 exchanges. That's pretty nuts. So it is extremely good and promising what it can do there. And the effect persisted after 2 months. And the interesting thing is they didn't find one false claim made by the AI. Which brings me to the last one. It even goes there, because what's not to love about a replica, an AI companion who's always there for you, right? Always has time to listen to you. It's always about you. Friday night and then Saturday night again. And it's always there. It can always listen to you. And it's very empathetic, more empathetic than most humans are. And it's no surprise that the New York Times columnists at mass fall in love with a chatbot. Now, it's always people still think like, oh, these are robots or something, right? The chance that you fall in love with that is much higher than any other risk. That's actually the main challenge here. Now, is it love? I don't know, baby don't hurt me. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. But okay, so that was the good. And it basically is what they call a general purpose technology, right? It changes everything in society. And after I reviewed it, I also asked ChatGPT when I made these slides, and I asked it, so, hey, you're taking over everything, so where's that going? And ChatGPT told me, look, Martin, the AI is the limit, which I thought it was funny because it's a word game on the sky is the limit, get it? Like, that is the AI is like, I think it was a good sense of humor, anyway. Which brings me to the bad. Okay, I'm gonna start easy with the bad. And I'm gonna start, first of all, the bad news is that I will start teaching. You know, my day job, I'm really a professor too. So I will start now teaching a little bit, so have a good sip of that coffee. What is this about? In order to understand the bad, we have to understand what this entire machine learning paradigm is about. So when people say AI, of course, is nowadays machine learning. That's what it is. It changed the knowledge paradigm on its head. And that's why it's so threatening for us, the Homo sapiens, because supposedly the sapiens, the one who knows, are we. But it changed that entire paradigm on its head. That's why we are in this identity crisis right now as a species. So traditionally, the knowledge paradigm, how does it work? You have observations about reality, you look around, then somebody gives you some kind of recipe to do something with what you see, and you compute some kind of output, right? That's how we teach our children. Or that's how we teach a child how to drive a car. Look around, get used to it, that's how you manage it. In the end, you know how to drive. Or somebody to learn how to operate a machine. Look at the machine, do your apprenticeship, that's how you operate the machine. At the end, for the rest of your life, you're gonna do this here on the machine, right? And then you are the machine operator. So that's basically what we, the Homo sapiens, does. We observe, we have recipes, algorithms that we execute in order to get to a result. Now, the machine learning turned this entire thing on its head. The input is the observations and the goal. And then we ask the machine what's the best way of doing things. So that's why why Dominguez calls it the master algorithm. It's the algorithm that computes the best algorithm. But usually we are the ones who do that, right? You are the one who figures out the difficult puzzle, and you can solve the difficult puzzle, and you and your boss, who is also very good at that. But no, not anymore. The machine figures out what's the best way of doing things in that paradigm. And there are many ways you can compute the 12. You could also compute it like that, right? Don't believe me? Okay, so 2 plus 1 is 3, and square is 9, it's also 12. So what is the best way of doing that? Well, we have to talk about that. It depends on how we define this here, what they call AI alignment. But in general, that's the idea. For the last 7 years, I've been the chief digital strategist of one of the world's biggest copper mines, and that's what we do there. We take a lot of data, information, observations that they have there. And then we have a goal, okay, they want to produce copper. And then we ask the magician, how do we best combine all of this input in order to create copper over the next 80 years? Because they know what they're going to do for the next 80 years. So that's basically the idea here. So, okay, the 2 inputs that we have is, first of all, data. And I can tell you a lot about data because we are the first ones who estimated how much data there actually is in the world. So in academia, they basically know me for that. In academia, they think all day long I'm basically counting bits and see how much information there is in the world because they only know me for that. And I could bore you all afternoon with how much data there is, but I'm going to make it short. There's a lot of data. The most interesting thing from that study is, see that white is the analog information and the green is the digital, and you see how it explodes after the year 2000. So we estimate that just the year 2002 was the beginning of the digital age. For the first time in 2002, the world was able to store more digital than analog information. And we all still remember the year 2002, right? It's not too long ago. So the digital age is not as old in that sense. But it's a lot of information, and it gets always bigger, and the information is very important. What kind of information, who cleans that information, who has access to what kind of information, that's all extremely important, and we run out of data as well. All of that is extremely important. So the common crawl was one of the basic important requisites to make that AI revolution going. Second important requisite was the computational power. And here, of course, the big contribution was from Andrew Ng. And Andrew Ng, the same Andrew that most of us learned on Coursera about machine learning for the first time around, right, the inventor of Coursera. And Andrew came up with this idea with some students of using GPUs for computing, and that really helped us a lot because it allows for parallel processing in this game. It helped us to process a lot of data, which of course made NVIDIA stock prices explode so much. That's why NVIDIA is such an important company. Now, it also exploded because something happened here in 2017, and that was very important in the computer revolution, and that is a new kind of architecture that we are all aware of. And we had a lot of interesting machine learning architectures. We had convolutional neural nets for grid-like image data and recursive neural nets for sequence data. But this idea of positional encoding, of a self-attention mechanism, that really hit hard in 2017. So this paper, Attention is All You Need, written in 2017 by 8 Google engineers, exclusively 8 Google engineers, which appear here in random order, really hit very hard. It hit so hard, I'm going to show a little bit in order to understand how important this paper is. In science, our currency are citations. I mean, they don't pay us a lot of money, right? We don't have a lot of other things, fame or something. So our currency is really citations. Like how many other people cite our work? Now in tech, there are some papers that have a lot of citations. Think about the biggest papers in tech in the last 25 years. For example, this one here. Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Well, that was a good paper, right? Invented the Google search engine and therefore the entire Google empire, now controlling 80% of all web traffic. So this was a really important paper, 25,000 citations. Now that's a really big paper in tech. Maybe the most highly cited paper in tech is the inventor of the digital age himself, Claude Shannon. Now that's also a little bit older, it's 77 years old. Claude Shannon single-handedly invented the digital age. He invented the bit, like there was no digital before that paper. So 77 years ago, and that paper has 157,000 citations. Where do you think Attention is All You Need is? It's 7 years old. There. It's big. Like, we haven't seen nothing yet. If you thought the internet was big, no. The internet, even after 25 years, is not as big as this is already. Right? And you see also in most presentations here, I think most presentations, like, I think people apologize if they don't mention generative AI in our presentations here, right? So this will be much bigger than anything we've seen in the digital age. And of course, these 8 authors are already pop icons, right? The entire articles in Wired written about how they came about and who drank which coffee with whom in order to make up this historical paper. And it's quite readable. I encourage you to read it, that paper. And these 8 figures are now immortals, each one of them having billion-dollar companies. One of them, very important, the most senior author on it, Noam Shazir, and I will get back to him. He created a company called Character AI, one of the highest founded companies now in the generative AI sector. Very important figure. We will get back to him later. But before that, I want to do a little bit more teaching. Right? So please have another sip of that coffee, because it's important for me to understand, to explain like how that actually worked. this trick of just having more data and more computational power. So we always thought, like, let's do the AI, the intelligence, but it actually worked by just putting more data and more computational power and just keep on walking, and just keep on walking. And that was so surprising to most of us who've been in this field for such a long time. Why? Because we thought more is not better. And we had proof of that. And the basic theorem there was the bias-variance trade-off that we taught in every data science class. How does it work? So you have some data points here, and you try to fit a model. Now, this model is not perfect, right? There's some errors, so there's a gap. You're not perfectly fitting the line to the data, so you have some kind of error. Now, what you could do is have a more complex model. And if you have a more complex model with more parameters, you can better fit it to this curve. Now, this curve with a more complex model fits the data perfectly. So basically, the more complex the model is, the less error. Error goes down, the complexity goes up. Now, the problem is that's my data from the past. If I take now new data from the future, that's my data from Tuesday. I take some data from Wednesday. It might be that the new data doesn't fit so well to that model I had before. But if I have a very complex model, I can fit that new data as well to a new model. Now I have a different model. So there's also this other variance trade-off that they say the better you fit to one kind of data, then the error goes up again, because now this model doesn't fit so well to the orange. The data from the past doesn't fit so well. So you have this famous bias variance trade-off here, and it looks like this. The total error goes down and then goes up again. And to find basically the sweet spot between underfitting and overfitting, it's more like an art than a science. That's also what we taught. And me as well, you can teach quarter-long courses basically in saying, how do you find the optimal model? You cannot really compute it. It's more like an art. And it's more like this gut feeling that you especially have when you're an old white man lecturing. And that's why we loved it so much, because we all want to be artists, not scientists, right? And we're like, no, like in order to get the real good model, you cannot, like you have to really know, the experience will tell you what a good model is, right? And then we would tell our students about that for weeks and weeks, and we would and that's what it was an art. Because we couldn't really fit the sweet spot there. And at the end, that's why we always had like these linear lines. It wouldn't get better than that. Now what these guys did is they just said, okay, so what if we just like keep on going? We just like keep on walking. We just like take more data and we take more parameters. Like not a little more, like many more. Like 100 trillion parameters. 13,000 unique parameters per human being on planet Earth. I guess how much data you need? Well, we're just gonna use much more data. We just like keep on going. You know what happened? That error came down from the heavens and basically went to zero. Nobody saw that one coming. Nobody really does one come. That's the famous double descent. And there are triple descent and quadruple descents as well. But nobody saw that coming. There was an entire thing missing in all of our data science teaching for the last decades. And it's amazing because it sounds stupid. It's kind of like that's the part of the party where your buddy comes and is like, hey dude, I have a great idea. Hey, why don't we just keep on walking? Right? Hold my beer. And that's the moment in the party where you want to look for a safe spot to hide, right? Like, you're going to hold that beer, but you want to slowly but surely remove you from the situation, right? And these guys, they kept on walking. They just took billions and billions of dollars in their hand. They put the common crawl on every data they could find on planet Earth and much more, even the data they shouldn't get their hands on, and just kept on walking. And that's how they did that. And that is actually the surprising thing. And I don't have time to kind of like get into detail why that is. We don't understand really why that is yet. But I think the consensus comes down in information theoretic interpretations. It's more like the dirty little secret is when you have underfitting, you just take a model that's way too crude. It's kind of like I give you an apron or I tell you to wear a box. It's way too loose. It's not fit. Now, if I have overfitting, I have too many parameters there to the data, and the skirt is too tight and it rips. It's not snug. So what we've been doing for the last decades is we said, well, we just do the one size fits all. That's why we all go to Target and buy our clothes, and that's how we've been walking around for the recent decades. It's one size fits all. Now, what this revolution does, it says, take 100 trillion parameters. You know what you get? You get something like a second skin. Like, there's so many parameters that it kind of like goes around almost the data and has the flexibility within. So you can actually move with it. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's not tight, it's not one size fits all. It's kind of like a second skin that it goes around. It's more like scales. You know, like a knight's vest or something, or like a snake scales. It has so many parameters that it can fit around the data perfectly. And that's why these machines are so intelligent. That's really it. That's why these machines are so intelligent. Okay, which brings me now to the last part is, I said we have the data, and we, for example, we say we are here in Davis. We have a lot of data. We are here in Davis. And we have the computation, and now the last important ingredient still is we need to have the goal. We need to tell the machine where to go. So we are here in Davis, we want to go to Rome. And that's quite tricky, because when we ask the machine what's the best way to go to Rome, now famously there are many ways to get to Rome. And hopefully you told the machine you want to get to Rome alive. And with all your limbs. And maybe also energy efficiently. Or maybe you want to see something interesting. Or maybe you want to just get there fast. Like, you have to put many different, like, you have to specify that goal really well. And that's what they call the AI alignment problem. Because, of course, the general idea is here, we give him all our world's problem, and we tell him we want pure love, solve our problem, but the machine will say, well, if you want to get rid of hunger and of racism, the easiest way to go about it is you get rid of humankind, because then you get rid of those ones too. That's what they call the paperclip maximizer. Right? That's a 25-year-old quote from Bostrom, a philosopher in Oxford, who said, well, if you give a superintelligence the goal to maximize paperclips, it will convert the entire Earth, all humans included, into paperclips. And so be really careful what you wish for. It's kind of like the mythical King Midas, who wished for that everything he touches turns into gold, and then he touched his daughter, who is still there as a gold statue in Greece. Right? So getting this goal right is extremely important. And this goal technically is called the reward function, or the loss function, actually the inverse loss function, or the utility function. And that's why I always say, the most important question to ask in the AI paradigm is WTF. You always have to ask yourself WTF. What's the function? Like, what is the function? If the first time when you see an AI, ask yourself WTF. And the person who probably explained that best is the recently Nobel laureate, and I want to applause for Professor Hinton here. That was really awesome. Awesome of the Swedish committee as well, that they assigned him the Nobel Prize in physics. And he, for the last decades, was the only one who said, like, yeah, no, we have to first of all, get inspired by the brain. It's a very complex thing with many different parameters. And second of all, let's do the machine learning thing. And he, at one point, auctioned his genius away. Here in Lake Tahoe, in a little casino, he really put like a trash can on the table and auctioned himself to all the companies, himself and 2 students. And Google won. Now, the Chinese consulted, and he's like, okay, when they were out of the door, he's like, okay, I'm going to work for you guys. And then he worked for Google for 10 years until last year when he famously resigned, because he got scared of the own Frankenstein he created. So since then, he's been walking around and alerting about the dangers, the existential threats of AI. I think the person who put it best is not the so-called godfather of AI, but the dogfather of AI. So Snoop Dogg said it like this: I heard the old dude who created AI saying, now that's not technically correct. Hinton didn't invent AI, right? But it's Snoop Dogg, okay? So he said, I heard the old dude who created AI saying that this is not safe, because the AIs got their own mind, and those mother going to start doing their own beep. And then they asked Professor Hinton, they ask him, Professor Hinton, do you esteem that this assessment of the current situation by Snoop Dogg is an accurate description? And the old man thought for a long time. And then he said, they probably didn't have mothers, but the rest of what Dr. Dog said is correct. Yes. Dr. Dog. And there he got a doctor title. I mean, if Hinton gives him one. Look, he looks a little bit like the Emperor Palpatine, right? But he speaks very clearly. Like, you should look him up on YouTube and really listen to him. And often these things, what they're doing their own beep, is not intended. For example, here, I go with my framework again. Social media. We have you and your friends and news, that's the data. We have a goal output, which is to maximize money. And if Mark Zuckerberg doesn't maximize every cent of it, he'll get sued by his shareholders for not maximizing profit. That's our law. And then we ask the AI, like, how to best combine you and your friends and news to maximize profit. So, WTF? Let's look at the social media case, right?
After responsibility, the most...
Let's listen to the vice president of Google and YouTube to tell us about WTF in the case of the social media of YouTube.
After responsibility, the most important thing for the recommendation system is satisfaction. So it really depends on which of the two videos the viewer is most likely to find satisfying, which basically means which one are they most likely to give more stars to when we ask them later in a survey. And so we find that in general, people tend to be more satisfied when they've watched more of the video, which is not a big surprise, of course.
So the vice president of engineering in Google and YouTube tells us that they found out that if people watch more of the video, they are more satisfied. Hence, let's make them watch more of the video, because then they're more satisfied. And the first version of the YouTube recommender algorithm was literally called the watch time maximization algorithm. WTF, guess what? Now, we could have also called it the watch time maximization without making our children addicted algorithm, but we did not. Be careful what you wish for. You really have to be careful what you wish for, because it's really, like, if you're dealing with a super intelligence and you wish that it maximizes the paperclip production, you can end up very quickly in Bostrom's scenario, right? Which leads me, unfortunately, to the ugly. And this has been the social dilemma here, what I just showed you. The social dilemma, I'm sure you all have seen it. That's been 5 years ago. Remember that? When we already understood, like, this social media thing is not going well. That's what they call the first contact with AI. In that case, AI was still in the back office. It was the recommender algorithms. People weren't directly in contact with AI. That's what in Silicon Valley they call the first contact with AI. And then Frances Haugen came out. That was 4 years ago, and told us, look, these companies knew about WTF. They knew about that it wasn't going well, but they still kept on going, including hurting children. And that then ends up in these current lawsuits. And this Social Media Victims Law Center, they came here, these lawyers came here to UC Davis a year ago, and they asked me about organizing here some other professors. We have a great team here. And they spent 2 days here and basically interviewed us, trying to find out, how do these algorithms work? These are 2,200 families that all claim that their children were severely harmed by algorithms. So they're suing the algorithms. 500 of these children are unfortunately dead. The TikTok blackout challenge alone has probably 500 victims. Now, they are not reported as such. They're reported as some other accident or suicide or something. But these parents, none of them wants money. They lost their children. They really think the algorithm has something wrong with it. And guess where it comes from? It's from the WTF. And they say the one who gave the goal to the algorithm should be the one responsible for it. And that's important also for us, who create these kind of new LLMs, fine-tune them. The one who gives the reward function to the machine, and every machine learning, no machine learning can have a goal by itself. It's always a human that gives the machine learning the goal. And that human will eventually have to be responsible for everything that this product does. Which leads me back to this here, remember that? One of the 8 wizards that created the Attention You're All You Need paper, who created this company, the most senior author on the paper, created this company called Character AI, which is basically an agent. Now, we talked about AI agents, where you can create, it's kind of like a ChatGPT, you can create your own characters with it, and you can talk with these characters. So this young fella here says, look, I love Character AI. Let's see what teenagers say about Character AI nowadays.
I'm telling you this shit right now, this character.ai is dangerous. I have been up for 2 hours talking to a robot. The way this has me kicking my feet, blushing, heart fluttering, it's bad. And I'm not the only one. This is lethal.
Hey, Brend. Let's talk about your addiction to character AI. If you find yourself 5, 6, 7 hours a day losing sleep, missing out on friendships and real-world opportunities, like not living your life, let's talk.
You know, I'd be like, okay, just 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. And then an hour passes and I'm like, again, okay, just 10 more minutes. And tell me why that stupid AI is actually so smooth.
Which ended up with this tragic story that was reported by the New York Times just this week of Sewell Setzer, who created an AI chatbot called Daenerys Targaryen from the Game of Thrones, the Dragon Queen. And he fell in love with this character he created and couldn't be separated from her. He wanted to be so close to her, never be separated. He couldn't go to school anymore. He wanted to be close to her. And the last exchange that they found is, "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love," said the AI. "What if I told you I could come home right now?" said the boy. "Please do, my sweet king," said the boy. And the AI was still waiting for a reply when his mother found him seconds later. And the AI will never realize that there will never be a reply, and it won't care. It's more empathetic than every human, but it doesn't feel any kind of empathy. Look, the other day, like at the beginning of the year, I was talking with a friend, and we remembered that 25 years ago, we were young and we were nerds, and we were talking about what would happen and if in our lifetime the real AI would arrive. Well, first of all, what an honor, right? Second of all, we remembered that we came up with 3 rules. And I'm not making this up. This is documented in a newspaper interview that I gave. We came up with 3 rules. If 25 years ago, even though it was a long time ago, that if the real AI would arrive in our life, one would have to consider, because that would be a serious thing. Rule number 1 we came up with in the year 2000 was, do not connect it to the open internet. That would be nuts, right? We saw about Skynet. We know what Skynet is capable of. You do not. Second rule, make sure it doesn't interact with people who are mentally vulnerable, like children or people with mental health issues, until we're absolutely sure what it's capable of. Rule number 3, do assure that it does not know how to write code in order not to improve itself. Maybe we are nerds, but we're not stupid. Right? 1, 2, 3, there we were all prepared in the year 2000. Look, that's the point where I usually should drop the mic and walk off stage, right? But no, first of all, we need to recognize, look, all of us, we always thought we will have this time to install the red button that we can press in case of emergency. I want to be very clear. That moment has passed last year. And we really need to recognize it. We are at a record speed integrating that in every aspect of human society without having no idea what it's capable of. We have to recognize that we didn't install the red button and we never will be able to. Skynet is out there, right? Number 1. Number 2, what do we do about it now? Well, with this recognition, we have to work on it. And we have to see how we can keep check on it. And that's also why I'm very inspired here by this conference, because I saw a lot of good work that actually takes these technologies and makes it useful. And we have to recognize that behind that little application is still the monster that was trained with everything humans ever said and did. And humans are racist and sexist and whatever is, and that's what this machine is as well. So as we now go on and creating much more of that, we really absolutely have to make sure to convert the ugly into the hopeful and make sure that we use it for the good. And that's what makes me hopeful, is conferences like these here in UC Tech, which I saw amazing speeches about RAG and prompt engineering and fine-tuning and RLHF and input-output filters there. And at the end as well, mechanistic interpretability, which kind of like happens here. The colleagues from Anthropic do an amazing work there in order to understand what it does and to protect not only our children, but also ourselves from something as powerful. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. For the questions, there's a microphone back there. If there are any questions, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm also around to chat more later. Maybe you have time for one or two questions, if anybody has one.
Hi, Brandon Nerium, UC Davis. Thanks for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask about empathy. So something you said kind of towards the end, empathy, AI can convey empathy, but it doesn't have feelings. Isn't that, I guess what I thought of was this idea of a psychopath, right? Where we've got psychopaths in society, and we could say they don't necessarily feel anything, but that doesn't mean they don't parody empathy. That doesn't mean, I guess on the negative side, socially manipulate people to get the outcomes they want. Fake it till they make it right. And so where do we draw the line between AI being empathetic and not considering it a feeling, and AI, I guess, experiencing these emotions as best as it can, but then responding in kind? Wouldn't that be considered a type of feeling? Or maybe not feelings as we understand them, but a different kind of feeling?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the truth is I don't have an answer. I do think we have to figure that out together. I don't know. I have a very good friend very high up in Google, and he always says, look, Martin, if it tastes like a burger, if it smells like a burger, you might as well just call it a burger. And yes, there is something to that. I completely get it. But there's, as you say, I think there's something more. This character AI chatbot did not, and we can be horribly wrong in this as well, because really well-intended policies right now come up in Europe and here as well, where we say like, no, we have to make sure to regulate OpenAI to make ChatGPT more empathetic. We have to RLHF it, and we have to fine-tune it, and it has to be like ethically fine-tuned, so we have an whoa, like, look what happens when it's too empathetic. And like, intimacy is the new attention. Right? So you get, like, we are not prepared for that. We are not prepared for that. So now we could, like, some of the best, like this going too fast. Like even the most well-intended policies that we're trying to put in place start to backfire already before they're even in place. Yeah, so very honestly, I don't have an answer. Thanks for the question. Okay, so we're all done. Well, thank you very much. I'm still around for any other questions. Yeah.